Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as usual by my doubting co-host, Tucker Hazel.
Huh?
And we're here today to talk about all the
I doubt
doubters. Now, Tucker's not necessarily a doubter. Tucker's a man of wonderful optimism.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But there's one topic that Tucker and many in the Nintendo community doubt. And this is the size and scale of the Metroid franchise.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Metroid sells the way that Nintendo's even A or B tier franchises.
Yeah.
But what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about why we feel like this must always be the case.
Sure.
Because right now we're in a season of speculation.
Yeah.
We're in a season of Nintendo Direct speculation. It's a season of new hardware speculation. And Metroid Prime 4 is kind of a hot ticket item at the moment.
It's kind of the only ticket item.
Yes.
Frankly.
Yes.
The other items aren't really worth a ticket. I would not give a ticket for Mario vs. Donkey Kong. Frankly.
Most items that people are talking about don't actually exist.
No.
3D Mario,
Yes.
new EPD4 game, various things. Metroid Prime 4 is the only sort of big deal game announced right now.
Yeah.
That's been getting a lot of people chatting. And a lot of conversation switched to, in 2024, 2025, doesn't really matter for the point of this discussion.
Yeah.
But what does matter is this notion of Metroid Prime 4 as a release day game, release window game, holiday 2024 game.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of chatter that Metroid doesn't belong in really any of those positions.
Sure.
And I want to talk about this generally, and I
Yeah.
want to introduce some ideas from other Nintendo series that might help support my idea that if maybe Metroid's not this big franchise right now,
Yeah.
but A, that doesn't always matter to Nintendo, and B, I don't think it necessarily has to be small forever.
Sure.
And this is what I want to get into. What's your knee-jerk feeling about the position of the Metroid series?
Now, let's narrow it down
Sure.
the options to talk about here.
Yeah.
Is the claim that it should or shouldn't be a launch game for the next system, launch window for the next system, holiday game for Nintendo? Which one of those are we going to focus on, or is it kind of just all of them? Because I think there's different understandings for each of them. Or I would respond differently to each of those.
Sure. Well, I mean, we can take them one at a time. I mean, ultimately, my feeling is that I just think that Metroid and a lot of Nintendo franchises are talked about as though they belong in these little boxes.
Yeah.
And I was watching our friend Bo's video, which was really insightful, going through what he thinks the launch titles for Nintendo Switch 2 can be, and kind of talking about what works as a launch title, what doesn't work as a launch title.
Yeah.
And I think that's fair. Not every great game is a great launch title.
Yes.
And I think that makes sense. But I ultimately think that when people say Metroid is too small to be a launch game or too small to be a holiday game, I don't think either are true.
I agree with one and disagree with the other.
Okay, sure.
Let's start with holiday.
Yeah.
Because that's the one that I agree with.
Yeah.
Metroid games have released in holiday before.
Yeah.
Nintendo likes to have multiple games in different genres around that holiday season, which what we're counting is October, November, December. December games are much rarer for Nintendo, though they do occasionally happen.
Yeah.
But that October-November window is where we saw Dread release just a couple of years ago. And so I would never doubt to say, oh, Metroid can't release in the holiday season, or that they can't push it as one of their lineup of holiday titles, because it's happened before, and that's frankly just how I see it happening. I was like, that's the most likely place for it to launch. So I have no issue saying that Metroid is any size. Size is irrelevant to, they can release it alongside some other stuff in the holiday season. That is a neutral statement to me.
And this is one of the points I think is important.
Yeah.
I think that people often think about the holiday game as the game that must necessarily release in this window because it's going to sell a shit ton of units.
Yeah.
And that's really the only thing that fits there. That's really not historically been true.
Okay.
I mean, even if we look back at the Metroid series, and I've made some data in a spreadsheet that I'll actually just link in the description so people have easy access to it, for a couple different franchises that I want to talk about. But Metroid actually has a good precedent of releasing in the holiday. Metroid Prime 1, as well as Metroid Fusion, are both holiday games, actually arguably on the same day.
Yeah.
There's some debate. It's actually hard to find a pinpoint to the day release date for these games. But they were both holiday games. Metroid Prime 2 Echoes was also a holiday game.
Yeah.
And then obviously Metroid Dread was a holiday title too, dwarfed by two much larger games, sales-wise, in Mario Party Superstars, and then also in Pokemon BDSP.
Yeah.
But it was still a holiday game. And holiday just needs to be, in my opinion, a marquee title.
Sure.
And marquee doesn't always just mean sales-wise. Because one of the other franchises I want to bring in this conversation, Tucker, is Xenoblade.
Sure.
Xenoblade also has a history of being holiday titles. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is the most obvious one, releasing in December.
Yeah.
But Xenoblade Chronicles X, depending on the region, was also a holiday game.
Sure.
It released, I think what I have here, April in Japan of 2015. But
we don't care about that.
Yeah.
Also, when we're talking about holiday, we're meaning Christmas, which applies to the Western nations that celebrate that primarily.
Yeah, and so Xenoblade Chronicles X launches a holiday game there as well. Now, obviously, that game didn't sell especially well. It sold less than 1 million units overall, but it was still the holiday game because it's a big, large game that shows the power of Wii U.
Yeah.
And it's weird to say the power of Wii U, but that's what it did. It's the most impressive game on the system by a significant margin, I think.
Yeah. Now, one thing I want to throw into this conversation about what a holiday game should be, at least from the eyes. We're reading into the minds of Nintendo, the eyes of Nintendo, what a holiday game should be. I agree that it does not necessarily mean this needs to sell a shit ton of units.
Yeah.
I think the cultural understanding and the kind of people that we talk to is when you say the holiday game for a system, for a company, it is that game that's going to sell a ton of units. You don't release Pokemon in any other place other than November, because not only is that going to sell a bunch of units just because it's launching in that window, but because that's the major stocking stuffer for Nintendo for the year. That's the same with Mario Party. That's the same that Odyssey was in 2017. These are the kind of games that people just pick up for their families, for their friends, for their kids, and Metroid does not fit into that. And so while I would say, no, of course, literally Metroid can be a holiday title because it can release in that window and sell fine, but it is not the holiday title because it will not be the one that is pushing units that people are getting for their friends and family. And I do want to say that even when we're drawing in something like Xenoblade, though that I think still applies to that, and where I would say it applies to Xenoblade and Metroid is even in the circumstances of Xenoblade 2 as a holiday title, Xenoblade X as a holiday title, Metroid Dread as a holiday title, each of those were the smallest of their holiday lineups. And so Metroid Prime 4, if we presume that it's going to be a holiday title this winter, releasing alongside a Pokemon, a Mario Party, presumably 3D Mario, EPD4, it will be also, again, the smallest of all of those. And it absolutely does not preclude it from being a holiday window title, but not the holiday title. And I will say, I was just looking at the Xenoblade argument for Xenoblade X being like the big thing to push that system in that holiday season. That released alongside 5 other holiday titles, all in bigger franchises, all of which sold better. Actually, I'm not sure about Amiibo Festival.
Amiibo Festival and Mario Tennis, I'll just mention, did not sell better.
Okay, but Triforce Heroes, Xenoblade X, Yoshi's Woolly World, Yokai Watch, Ultra Smash, and Amiibo Festival. That is a who's who of C-tiered Nintendo stuff that they just hopes to God, if all of these together sell as much as we would a Mario Party or a Pokemon, we're going to be happy. But so they just kind of splatter shot against the wall. And Xenoblade was one of those. But I agree with the idea of it being something that's impressive. I'm not exactly sure if that really lines up in terms of that usually being something that Nintendo pushes for their holiday season. The traditional Pokemon or Mario Party or something that is that holiday game almost always. Those are not the hardware pushing games. But I see the argument for it.
I mean, and the reality also is that Nintendo doesn't have many games like this. They don't have many games like Xenoblade or Metroid, which is why I think that they are often given a preferential window. Because they illustrate a different breadth and dimension of the library. Now, the reason I think that this is important in particular for the conversation around Metroid as a launch game or as a launch window game for Switch 2, be it cross-gen, be it Switch, it's been only moved to Switch 2, whatever. I don't really care about the specifics of that in the context of this. But a lot of people are operating under the assumption that the Nintendo Switch 2 is another Nintendo Switch that is a little bit more powerful. And now we know from the Bloomberg report, well, no, in quotes, that it's a larger device, but it's essentially a similar one. I think people undervalue the ability for a piece of hardware to illustrate the power of the technology.
Piece of software.
Piece of software to illustrate the power of the new technology. Metroid has been used in this way before. Now, there's 2 key examples of Metroid being a launch game, and I'm gonna be fudging things a little bit here, and I want people to understand that what I'm saying here is not as rock solid as Twilight Princess launched with Wii.
Sure.
Twilight Princess.
Of course.
You see what I mean.
Actual launch games.
Yeah. When the DS released, Metroid Prime Hunters First Hunt, a demo version of Metroid Prime Hunters, released on day one with all DSs.
Sure.
Because Metroid Prime Hunters was not going to be ready for release. That was fast-tracked at the behest of, I believe it was started by Reggie, but then Miyamoto, and I believe also Iwata, came to a group decision to get First Hunt on DS right away. The reason they did that is because DS illustrated... the First Hunt illustrated that DS is quite graphically powerful. Mm-hmm. It also illustrated what the system can do in terms of multiplayer.
Yeah.
So that's what that was used for.
Yeah.
Similarly, Metroid Dread was the marquee piece of software for Switch OLED. Mm-hmm. Launching on October 8th alongside Switch OLED, it was the only game there on day one.
Yeah.
And it was a game wherein its art direction and color palette and everything were really well suited to that OLED screen.
Sure, yeah, it being a darker game. Yeah, the blacks being blacker.
Yeah, the planet of ZDR really being a technical showpiece for what the OLED can produce on that screen. There is great value to having a game at the launch of your hardware that illustrates that next step. Mm-hmm. I think that's especially important with Nintendo Switch 2 if we're operating under the assumption that the game or that the hardware is very similar to Switch 1.
Yeah.
You release a 3D Mario and maybe the draw distances are greater and the environments are bigger and it's finding some more horsepower in there.
Yeah.
But you're probably going to be hard-pressed to put that up against Odyssey and show a huge demonstrable difference.
Sure. Yeah, maybe.
You look at what Metroid Prime Remastered already did with Switch 1.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then you imagine that Retro Studios has been speccing out a version of Metroid Prime 4 to higher-end hardware. Then you probably have a very ambitious game, a very ambitious, very expensive game that can nicely illustrate what Switch 2 can do in a way that Mario can't. Yeah. Maybe Mario can sell the units, but Mario probably isn't going to illustrate the peak technical ability of your system the way that Metroid Prime 4 could, the same way that Prime 1 and 2 did for GameCube and 3 did for Wii. Yeah. And I will also note that this is an argument that I'm pulling in part from our new friend, Andres Restart, who put out a really good video about Metroid Prime 4 being on Switch 2. I'll link that in the description also so people can check it out.
Yeah. Now, you said earlier that it doesn't really matter where you fall on it being a launch window game or not, but you obviously do fall on it being either launch game for Switch 2 or launch window. And that is something that I don't know exactly where I fall on because I can see the arguments for both ways. I think that the idea of it being a big, graphically intensive game would play into, okay, you need better hardware that the Switch 1 can pull some of, as we saw with Metroid Prime Remastered, but it would certainly be better for Retro to have it on that next piece of hardware. But I do think that there is a very, very, very solid chance that it is not on that system at all in terms of releasing natively for that system at launch. Maybe there's another version later down the line or something like that. Yeah. But it has been in development for so long, and development was restarted in 2019, and obviously there was some work done by that point. It is a little bit hard for me to imagine that they worked on it for 3 years, and then Switch 2's hardware was getting them to be available to developers. Yeah. Even Nintendo's in-house developers probably didn't start working on their games for that system until 2021 or 2022.
I'd probably say that's the same.
And so then they have to weigh the pros and cons. Okay, we've developed so much of this game for this architecture, and hope maybe the architecture for the next system is similar enough to where it was the problem, but we don't know that, and I don't think it's not necessarily safe to make that assumption, to where maybe it is just a Switch 1 game, and maybe they're banking on the large install base of the Switch in order to push the numbers of that. And so if that is the case, and I think that it is fair to say that is likely. It's not impossible that it's a Switch 2 launch game or launch window game or Switch 2 exclusive, but it is likely that it is just on Switch 1. I think that reality, which again I think we can agree is likely, I kind of completely undercuts everything you're saying about it being a graphical showpiece, wanting to push it to something bigger for that next generation of hardware, showing what the hardware can do. That's only true if it is a launch window game exclusively for next-gen hardware.
Yeah, and this is why I ultimately don't really care about Metroid Prime 4 in particular for the larger point I want to make.
Oh, sure, okay.
My card's completely on the table. I believe that Metroid Prime 4 is a cross-gen game.
Okay.
And I believe that they made the decision similar to the decision they made with both Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
That we pivot this game to be on both.
Sure.
And we find an opportunity.
Yeah.
And ultimately, because I think it's also, what you're saying is also very possible. Metroid Prime 3 Corruption was a fall game.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's impossible. This is the last major, in terms of ambition, last major.
Well, no, if you remember, that's what Tears of the Kingdom was.
Oh, sorry, that's a great point.
Yeah.
In terms of ambition, I think this could be the last major game on the piece of hardware.
Sure.
But I also think it's important to remember, just as one final sidebar about Metroid Prime 4 in specific, that this is likely, and we'll probably never know, but this is likely one of the most expensive games Nintendo's ever developed.
Absolutely.
Undoubtedly. Yeah. I mean, they're working with Western AAA fidelity and standards here, which is extremely, extremely expensive.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that they're going to want to give this game the biggest opportunity to succeed that they can, which is why I think cross-gen is a great opportunity.
Yeah.
But the reason I keep saying opportunity is this is where I want to pivot the discussion larger. Because when we were doing our debate with Andres and with Nintendo Prime and everybody, the idea of Metroid Prime 4 being even in this conversation for launch window is often undercut by the notion that Metroid is too small. Now, Metroid is too small right now.
Yeah.
If you're operating the assumption that Metroid Prime 4 would come out and sell exactly on par with what the franchise has sold in the past.
Yeah.
But I want to make the case for why no Nintendo franchise is bound to the position that it's currently in, whatever that current position is.
This is kind of what the point of this conversation is.
Yes.
We got stuck in the Metroid Prime 4 rabbit hole, as many people have been lately.
Right.
But we're calling our way out. We gotta repel. We got, what's the thing that Lara Croft used to she slams it into the rock wall and pulls herself up. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah,
it's like a little pickaxe kind of deal.
Yes.
You got one of those.
I want to give the extreme example first, and then I want to go more granular in some other franchises. But there's a series called Animal Crossing.
Yes.
You're familiar with it?
Yes. I had to do a little research, but yes.
Animal Crossing New Horizons on Nintendo Switch has sold over 40 million units.
Yeah. Wow, she loves that.
The most updated figure I see right now is 43 million units.
Sure.
Now, previously, the best-selling entry in the franchise is Animal Crossing New Leaf at 13 million units.
Correct.
Now, 13 million is already putting Animal Crossing in Nintendo's top tier of IP.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that is a astronomical difference.
Yeah, and it's interesting that was the best selling.
Yeah.
But second down below that is Wild World on DS, which sold almost 12, so basically around that same amount. And so you can see for that set of generations, the Wii and Wii U and 3DS and DS, that's what Animal Crossing sold. And it sold less than that on Wii, on GameCube, and 64, but that was what they expected these games to sell. And you can assume that they thought that what's it called, New Horizons would sell 15, 16 maybe, be the biggest, but not be 3 times bigger, 4 times bigger.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because if you look at the sales for Animal Crossing prior to Wild World was on N64 and
only in
had
Japan.
2 different versions of the game in Japan on GameCube, it had 1 overseas. But all of those together didn't even sell 3 million units.
Yeah.
So even the jump from that to almost 12 million for Wild World was huge. Mm-hmm. And it comes down to opportunity.
It's also crazy that Wild World sold that much, and no one has ever talked about that game. I have never heard that game brought up once. People talk about GameCube Animal Crossing. They talk about New Leaf and talk about New Horizons. No one gives a single piss about that game. It sold over 10 million units. What the fuck? That's the first time I'm hearing of this. That's crazy.
Sure. And that's a different discussion for a whole different time. But I think ultimately, when they released Animal Crossing on DS, they struck something that they never had before. Mm-hmm. And that was the right platform and the right moment early on in DS's life to capitalize on people having this new powerful system in their pocket that they wanted to play Animal Crossing on. Mm-hmm. And it really, really, really worked, obviously. And then obviously in 2020, the pandemic hits and spikes Animal Crossing New Horizons sales to the moon.
Yes.
Even
one of the best-selling games of all time.
Yeah, even though the game then went on to continue to sell really well in the years that followed, and proving that the COVID bump was huge for Animal Crossing.
Yeah.
But there was more to it than that.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it was the opportunity to release in that moment around COVID that, again, spiked the series. Mm-hmm. I think that sometimes we undervalue opportunity of release in how these franchises succeed.
Yeah, sure.
Now I want to go to an example that's a lot more commensurate in scale to Metroid, and that's Pikmin.
Great.
Now, I've laid out all of what we have here for Pikmin.
Yes.
Now, Pikmin...
You can put Pikmin Blue on here, even though there's not sales data for that, and it's not relevant.
It actually is relevant.
Oh, shit! Oh, I fell right into his trap. Oh, no. I'm back in the hole. I'm back in the rabbit hole. You put one of those little mesh things with leaves on. I stepped right on it.
Fell into a pitfall seed.
Oh, yeah.
And again, all this data is linked for all of you guys in the description, so you can take a look at it. Pikmin. Pikmin 1 obviously releases in holiday 2001.
Obviously.
Or it might have been fall. I'm forgetting the exact date. I think it's holiday. I'll double check that. But Pikmin sells 1.6 million units. Pikmin 2 sells 1.2 million units. The new Play Control versions also, they sell about 500,000 units each.
Yeah.
Interestingly, for people who don't know, new Play Control Pikmin 2 releases in 2009 in Japan and Europe and various places. 2012 in America.
Yeah, that generation has a lot of weird... Yeah. It took 6 years to localize. No, it fucking didn't. You're lying to yourself. What happened? Someone forgot... Someone put the ROM of that in their drawer and like, oops. And they found like, oh shit, we should put this out.
Yeah. The important thing then, we jump to Wii U. Pikmin 3 on Wii U only sells about 1.2 million units. So the sales are pretty much hovering around that point.
Yeah.
Obviously, Hey Pikmin sells even less. Hey Pikmin, a terrible time to release that game.
Yeah.
But then we get to Pikmin 3 Deluxe, and we begin what is a very potent rollout on Nintendo's behalf, wherein they identified a franchise that they wanted to grow, believed had a larger place in the market, and took the necessary steps to ratchet up release cadence, merchandise cadence, and general visibility to make big.
Yeah.
And Pikmin 3 Deluxe sells 2.4 million units as a holiday title in 2020.
Yeah.
Pikmin Bloom releases to continue to grow that IP.
Yeah. No, you're right. It is relevant.
Pikmin 1 and 2 HD release to continue to maintain momentum ahead of Pikmin 4. And then Pikmin 4 comes out, and as of right now, I just have roughly above 3 million units. Because we're waiting for that next quarterly report to get the hard figure.
Yeah.
But the game has continued to sell really well in Japan, so we're above 3 million at minimum.
Which makes it, outside of 3 Deluxe, the best-selling game by, like, double.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nintendo said, let's flood the zone with new Pikmin releases in quick succession. Let's position them in the right places. Let's get them on the right piece of hardware. Let's get a lot of new merchandise. And let's make Pikmin happen.
Yeah.
And they made Pikmin happen.
Yeah.
Then let's look at Xenoblade for a second. Let's see if it's something you want to comment about Pikmin.
No, it's just interesting thinking back to a couple months ago when the last financial report came out. I believe you were kind of on the side of, I don't know if those are good numbers for Pikmin 4. Yeah. And I wonder why your tune has changed.
Because I was wrong. I think it's as simple as that.
I fell right into the trap.
No, and it's...
I never even thought it was a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I was just wrong.
Yeah.
I think that the Pikmin 4 number could indicate some things about the attach rate for games that are below like the highest tier on Switch right now.
Sure.
Which would maybe also give more evidence to the idea of Metroid Prime 4's best opportunity for success being in the next piece of hardware.
Sure, maybe.
But regardless, there is no doubt, and I should have been more charitable to this number, Pikmin 4 is the best-selling Pikmin game.
Yes.
Now by a considerable margin when you look at the size of the franchise.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt...
Well, I mean, even then, if we say the next one down is 2.4 or 3 Deluxe, that's still almost over 500,000 more. And by size and by percent, that's like a quarter, 33% more.
Yeah, and if we assume
which is a lot.
I would assume that Pikmin 4 will probably be sitting around 3.5 to 3.375 million copies
by
sold.
the end of its life cycle. Yeah.
Well, I'm talking about by this financial report they're about to get.
Maybe. That seems like a lot, but we'll see. I certainly hope so.
Just because Pikmin, the last hard number is 2.63, but the game we learned at the end of the year had passed 1 million units in Japan alone, which is significantly more than where it sat when we got to last numbers, I believe. Okay. So I think 3.5 is probably reasonable.
Sure, maybe.
But even still, we've seen that Nintendo can move the needle of a franchise like this. Yeah. Now, again, Pikmin is not moving entirely to the next echelon of success sales-wise, but I think it's important to always remember that sales is not really solely what's dictating Nintendo's calendar.
Yeah.
There's plenty of examples of this being true. I mean, they just launched a full remake of Another Code.
Yeah. That's going to sell maybe 35 copies.
Yeah. But let's look at Xenoblade also.
Sure.
Xenoblade is a good one to look at because Xenoblade, in a lot of instances, is less successful than Pikmin.
Sure.
Xenoblade Chronicles, when it released in 2010, didn't break 1 million units.
Yeah.
And the system, and then it then took a systematic effort from fans in Project Rainfall to help goad Nintendo into, frankly, probably doing what they were already doing, but showing them, because I was reading a Wada Ask interview about Xenoblade Chronicles 3D, showing them that there was an appetite that they didn't expect for the series beyond Japan. And from there, they completely ran with it. Xenoblade Chronicles 3D in 2015 was the marquee and remains the marquee game on new 3DS.
Correct, yeah.
It's the game that showed how powerful that piece of hardware was, and it's the one they trumpeted out. It wasn't right at release. It was about 6 weeks after release of the new 3DS.
Did a game release with that?
Yeah, it was Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate.
That was a new 3DS exclusive?
No.
Oh.
It was Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, and it was Majora's Mask 3D on the release day with new 3DS bundles.
Okay.
But there was no exclusive piece of software.
Oh, okay,
yeah. Although, of course, Monster Hunter took outsized use of the new hardware with the second stick and the circle nub. But I think that that's important. Again, it illustrates to me that Nintendo cares about more than just sales when it comes to leveraging new hardware.
Sure.
But then from there, the release cadence of this series continued at a very fast clip, again, despite the fact that the sales aren't even pushing what Pikmin is selling. The best-selling game in the series is Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Yeah. But that's not even at 3 million. That's at 2.7 million units. And then a little bit under 2 for both Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Yeah. But Monolith Soft is an integral part of the library, again, because Xenoblade offers something that nothing else in Nintendo's catalog offers. Yeah. You can make an argument for a franchise like F-Zero, as much as the argument pains me that Nintendo says, hey, we have our big retail racing game. Yeah. Okay, whatever. That's Mario Kart's got that niche now. We don't need Wave Race. We don't need to make some kind of deal for Diddy Kong Racing. We don't need to do anything because we have Mario Kart. They don't have a Xenoblade other than Xenoblade. Sure. And they don't have a Metroid other than Metroid. And I think it's important for people to remember that Nintendo does not make decisions solely based on these financial results. Sure. And as we can see, Nintendo can isolate franchises like Xenoblade and Pikmin and say, look, we think we can make these bigger. Yeah. Bring Xenoblade from a one-region game selling less than 1 million copies overseas, bring that number up slightly, but then bringing it to the forefront of Nintendo's audience and catalog with a successive and excessive, frankly, in some ways, number of releases from Monolith Soft and the franchise afterwards. I think that this notion that Metroid must always be small is just not necessarily true.
Yeah, and another interesting thing is we know that Nintendo recognizes this based on one of the sales slides that they had last time, which shows growth between series on previous systems, primarily the Wii entries, and then their entries on Switch and how much bigger they are. I remember one being Return of Dreamland Deluxe, the last previous mainline home console Kirby game, to... It was either Star Allies or Forgotten Land. I can't quite remember. It probably would have been Forgotten Land because that sold so much more. How much that blew up. Obviously, they did that for Animal Crossing. I think they might have even done that for Mario Kart, which has always sold very well. But obviously, Mario Kart's a new echelon of how well that it sells now. So we know that they are keeping an eye on the current moment and how interest in Nintendo is at an all-time high. Yeah. And they can take their smaller franchises and pump them full of gas, and they've been pretty good at this. And we see with the presumed coming in the next year, they're going to start doing this to Donkey Kong, and then they're going to start doing this. They've been starting to do this to Metroid, but once we get the next big release, maybe there will be a cadence over the course of the next generation where Metroid doesn't miss a beat, and we get a bunch of big releases, and they start to ratchet up in popularity. And maybe there's a movie, maybe there's something, especially now that they have this synergy And another interesting thing about Metroid Prime, I would totally agree that this series, the distinctness for Nintendo, for it being developed by a Western partner, but for it being a FPS game, which is very popular, being a realistic game, which is very popular, and the fact that Nintendo is in the position where they're trying to get more IP of their own IP that they can then multimedia-ify. And Metroid might be the most marketable of those in terms of what you think of in shows and movies and other media. Metroid is a sci-fi thing. It's aliens and there's a bounty hunter with a gun. That can be done, frankly, easily. And we've seen it done many times in movies and in shows. And so Metroid, I think, is poised to blow up over the next generation, even if not necessarily because of Prime 4 or because of the games, but because those in synergy with maybe a Metroid ride at their theme park, a movie or a show of some kind, I think can work very well together. And I agree that Prime 4 would really be the start of that. We've seen them bring Metroid back with testing the waters with Samus Returns, and then Metroid Dread, now that Mercury Steam has their sea legs, that's a full thing and was a relatively major release for them, especially for the franchise. Yeah. And then Prime Remastered, and then this coming soon.
Yeah, I think it's important to note a couple things about what you said, because you're totally right. I think that Metroid is a multimedia IP.
Yeah.
They've done this already. It's important to note that Metroid has maintained through the Jack-specific toy lines, in specific the World of Nintendo stuff, a pretty solid merchandise base already. Samus and also Figma, first four figures, it's one of the few Nintendo franchises that goes to that high end of merchandise also. Sure. Anything from Samus toys in Walmart to light up Samus helmets or arm cannons, to Dread Figma and Emmy Figma and everything. Like, that stuff exists. There's also been several manga for Metroid. Back in the early 2000s when Nintendo was toying with this multimedia idea. So I think that they are ready for Metroid to take that step, and I think that audiences would be very receptive to it. And there's no shortage of talent in Hollywood already saying how much they would explicitly love to work on Metroid.
Yeah.
I would imagine that there's a script being workshopped around.
Yeah.
But I also want to look at the release cadence of Metroid for a second. It's important to remember that there's really only been two gaps in consistent releases for Metroid across its history.
Yeah.
The first was after Super Metroid. There was an 8-year gap until Metroid Prime and Metroid Fusion. And then after Metroid Other M, there was a 6-year gap until Federation Force.
Yeah.
And as much as people want to discount Federation Force, A, the game is not bad.
Yeah. No, it's not that bad.
And B, it was the beginning of a consistent run of Metroid games.
Yes.
In the next year, we get Samus Returns. After that, we get Metroid Dread, the highest selling game in the franchise. And then we get Metroid Prime Remastered just 2 years after that.
Yeah.
So if Metroid Prime 4 is come out next year, this year in 2024, that's back-to-back yearly releases for Metroid.
Sure.
Even if it comes out next year, that's every other year, as they've been doing since Dread. Metroid is already back.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to just remember this. Nintendo identified Xenoblade Chronicles 2 as a holiday game for Switch 1 in a hot window to boost that to newfound success, knowing that game will do very well in the first holiday of a new piece of hardware. Also knowing that it will show audiences that Switch has the capability for this big open world Western action RPG, Japanese action RPG at release. Yeah. The same way in a holiday 2024 scenario where Switch 2 is launched in September, October, a holiday Metroid game that illustrates this big, according to reports, breathtakingly beautiful, pseudo-open world, Western, exploratory action FPS.
Yeah.
That's an opportunity.
Absolutely.
And I think that people are looking at this on the wrong end of the street. They're saying Metroid is small, so Metroid cannot move the system.
Yeah.
But it's actually time for the system to move Metroid. And in a holiday window, that will happen.
Yeah.
It's the same way that Metroid Dread, I'm sure, partially sold really well because people went and grabbed their OLED and they got the special edition of Metroid Dread at the same time. Yeah. The same way that the holiday window for Xenoblade brought Xenoblade to a 3 or 4 times X multiplier in its success in 2017. Yeah. The same way that Pikmin, with all of Nintendo's pushes, found new success last summer. Yeah. Metroid just needs its window. And I think that people are not recognizing that so many Nintendo franchises have moved up tiers.
Absolutely. No, totally.
Specifically because Nintendo identified the right time for them.
Yeah.
And for me, it's as simple as that. I just think it's a reductive way to talk about Metroid, to think that because Metroid sells as much as it does right now, it cannot sell, in my opinion, a demonstrably larger amount.
Sure. Yeah. No, the final point I want to end on is the idea of this as as launch title.
Yeah.
And even if we agree that it could be launch window or it could not be on the system at all, focusing in on if this is a launch title with the system.
Sure.
The reason, everything that I've heard about people talking about this game has not been, this can't be the holiday title or the launch title because Metroid is small.
Yeah.
Sorry. But it's Metroid can't be the holiday title or the launch title because Metroid is small. And I think that is still true.
Sure.
I think that it would be, it's ridiculous, I think, to think that Nintendo can launch the next system with only a Metroid
And
game.
I don't think they would.
I think that would be disastrous for them. Not because it wouldn't be a great game and not because that still wouldn't sell units, but because the expectation is there is a certain kind of game with a default at a certain level cap of sales potential that you want to launch a system with. Whether that is Pokemon or Zelda or Smash or Mario Kart or any of the other much higher selling Nintendo IP, having one of those at a system they've never skipped that, except for GameCube with Luigi's Mansion. Then that gets a little bit weird. Well, Melee's not too far away.
3DS had nothing.
Great point. And we saw how that worked out.
You're right. And we'll go speculation mode for a minute here. I've been largely avoiding it just because we're trying to do not a lot of speculation content for the most part, but we're already here. I believe that it will be 3D Mario and
EPD4.
EPD4. Yeah. I think it'll be a Switch Sports sequel.
Sure.
I think those are the main games. And then
which both have 15 million to 45 million in terms of their sales potential. Yeah. It's a big window.
And then I think Metroid Prime 4 either releases on the same day or it releases
a month
6 to 8 weeks later.
Okay, yeah.
Because I tend to believe, my heart is telling me Switch 2 is launching either September or October. And that leaves room for a late November game.
True, yeah. So, and which would be a perfect window for this.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, ultimately, you can't go with just Metroid. Yeah. But I think that was never on the table.
No, of course not. No.
And I just think that, again, 2017 is a great indication of what can happen here. Yeah. We can do the exact same thing. We can put Mario in October. Instead of Xenoblade in December, we put Metroid in December.
Sure.
If they hold Metroid until Q1 2025, sure, whatever. My entire point is that there is a window of time when Metroid will release on the next system when it is going to prove that it is much more than it is now.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we need to focus on. I totally get that we must sideline some of this IP for the big barn-burning day one title.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. But I also think that a lot of Nintendo's richness doesn't come from that.
Sure.
A lot of their as much as I'm going to adore the new 3D Mario game, and I will probably have as much, if not more, fun with the EPD4 game, with Metroid, Pikmin, Xenoblade, Fire Emblem, so many of these franchises are what gives Nintendo their breadth.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I think as a community, we should be advocating for these games to get, not like Nintendo's listening really, but advocating for them to get the prime, no pun intended, window they need to succeed.
Yeah.
And I believe that window for Metroid Prime 4 is close, if not at launch, close to the launch. Because I'm also not necessarily of the opinion that if you launch Metroid Prime 4 on the same day as 3D Mario, that Metroid Prime 4 is not going to sell. I don't think that's true.
I think that it would sell worse. And I think the point of that being, people buy Nintendo console for Nintendo games, and the game that's going to appeal to more people and that is going to dominate conversation is going to be the one with Mario's fucking face on it. And if that is the game that is getting the most buzz and selling probably 4 or 5 times faster than Metroid if they release on the same day, that stomps out Metroid's opportunity to have its time in the sun. Even if it is 1 month later or 8 weeks later, that 8 week window, 4 to 8 week window gives Metroid People already finished playing this at launch of the system. The reviews are out. The system is in hands, and now we have another thing that is sales momentum. That is balancing our release calendar a little bit better, and I think importantly for Metroid and for this growth opportunity, giving it a opportunity to have its own moment.
Sure.
I think that is way more important than getting it there at launch. It being just a couple weeks later. Saves it from being stomped over by Mario, and gives it space to call its own.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I think that you're probably right.
Yeah,
but I also just think that Twilight Princess wasn't killed by Wii Sports.
True, but I mean the truth of the matter is there were 3 Nintendo games at launch of Wii, and one of them was a sight truck and it didn't sell very well.
Yeah, but that's not commensurate to Metroid, I don't think.
It is, because it sold about the same amount of units as Metroid games had up to that point. It was a realistic
What's the
game.
sales of F-Zero 64, do we know?
F-Zero 64?
Sorry,
what?
Excitebike 64.
Oh, I have no fucking idea.
Because it sold 500,000 copies of Excite Truck.
No. Oh, yeah, no, that's true. Yeah.
I just don't... I think that there's a lot of factors going against Excite Truck at the launch of Wii that wouldn't be going against Metroid Prime 4.
Yeah.
Everybody's playing Breath of the Wild, but still almost 4 million people bought 1-2 Switch, and 1-2 Switch was...
But again, we're talking under the idea that there will also be that casual EPD4 game that fills both niches. The hardcore gamers and the everyone else gamers get the 3D Mario. The casual gamers get their party game, their EPD4 game. And then Metroid is also in the hardcore camp, but more hardcore gamers are going to want to play. It's freaking only in the hardcore camp, and more hardcore gamers are going to want to play Mario. Yeah. I think that the competing factors, especially for Nintendo, where people are focused really on only one game at once.
Sure.
I think Nintendo knows that it would be better for both games. To release them some window apart.
Again, I think you're probably right. I just think, again, ultimately, if because I really do like the line of logic that Andres posits that Metroid Prime 4 as a technical showstopper is an important launch game, the same way that Demon's Souls and Miles Morales stood next to the launch of PS5.
Yeah.
Everybody goes and buys Miles Morales, and then the people also go and buy Demon's Souls. Because Demon's Souls is the game that looks by magnitudes better than even Miles Morales did at launch. And again, I think you're probably... Again, if this is about opportunity, I think I have to check myself and say you're probably right.
Yeah.
That the best opportunity is probably 6 weeks later when people have finished Mario and they're ready for the next big game.
Yeah.
So you're right, but I just still hold. I reserve the right to be right if it's a launch game. That's what I want to do.
Sure,
but. No, again, this is largely just me airing a general grievance that I think that
fair enough.
We need to talk about Nintendo's smaller IP in a more flexible way.
Sure, yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to for me.
Yeah.
Whether it's Metroid, whether it's anything else.
Yeah.
So.
Like Dashin
the Giant. Launch game because they'll show... Think about the draw distance when Dashin's really tall. Think about you could have him at 60 frames per second terraforming the ground.
I mean, you could have belly button hairs on Jashin.
Yeah, you could have Jashin and Dashin. One could be fucking going down into the dirt. One can be making the dirt go up, and you could have having people fly all over the place.
You could.
Excite. I think we've decided that Excite bots, Trick Racing 2, and Dashin the Giant 2 are going to be what launched the Nintendo Switch 2.
Oh yeah.
It only makes sense.